This week's news from the tubes on F5 Live Refreshing Technology is proudly powered by Malwarebytes. Whether you use a PC, a Mac, or a mobile device, Malwarebytes Premium is the company's strongest protection ever. It fights threats that traditional antivirus software can't stop, plus it actively blocks threats like worms, rogues, dialers, trojans, spyware, and a whole lot more. It allows you to use your computer and mobile devices with confidence and peace of mind. To learn more and to get a special price, you can go to f5live.tv/malwarebytes. Back on the topic of AI, but staying within Europe and legal entities, we have the EU passing a draft version of what is being called the Artificial Intelligence Act, obviously also known as the AI Act. This is a massive, comprehensive set of laws relating to the regulation of AI within the EU. However, as we learned with GDPR, things that happen in the EU affect the world, because if you operate within the EU, you do end up being bound by these things. So this is going to be a big deal for everybody. The next stage of this, now that they've passed a draft, is for lawmakers and member states from around the EU to then negotiate the details of the bill. The draft took 2 years. The timing is spectacular. The draft has been in negotiations for 2 years since the initial proposal. They've been fighting it over for months, and now we're here. Now all the member states get to weigh in strongly before a final vote. The Parliament has put stricter obligations on models, foundation models, such as ChatGPT. Under the proposal, companies that make generative AI tools would have to disclose if they've used copyrighted material. So there's one of your constant issues, Avram, being addressed. The question comes down to, because I haven't actually read this full draft. I've gotten into some of it. I don't know when and where they're required to disclose this. I don't know if they're required to disclose it when they have accessed it, when they've used it as part of the information for a response, or if they have to have somewhere where they just list all of the copyrighted material. That doesn't seem like what the EU would go for. So my guess is the first one, which would bring us to, always citing sources, which has been a big complaint of both of ours. So those are the kinds of things that we will see as negotiations get hashed out. The draft kind of just says that it'll have to disclose copyrighted content usage. But we know the EU. We know how they deal with this stuff. Being passive and just having one big long list on the website is not going to be acceptable for them.
So my question about that is, disclose. How about license? So there's crediting sources, which is, one level. And then there's getting permission and compensating sources. And I think they need to do both. So here's a little something interesting. When in my segment before, we were talking about, I showed a 2-second video, text to video playground.
Yeah.
And like many other image generating AIs, it trained itself on every image by the way, the model from that is from a Chinese company. I forget their name. Not one people have heard. Most people have heard of. Um, so anyway, they train themselves on Shutterstock, which is a how would you call it, a royalty free images company, a stock
Right.
images company, and people pay money to use Shutterstock images,
But not a
like we pay to use them.
not a free royalty free
Right,
image.
right. You don't pay an additional. I guess what I mean
Right.
is you don't pay additional royalties
Right.
after you pay for the image,
Right.
right? And we have a
It's different from like Pexels, right, which is royalty free but free use.
right,
Shutterstock is not that. Shutterstock is a paid service, but you don't have to pay every time you use one.
yeah. We now have some kind of relationship going with them. I think where we have to pay for every single one, but we don't have to pay for it in perpetuity. Like
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
you put it on an article, and as long as we don't put it on another article, we don't have to pay again. But
Right.
um, whereas, and I don't know what their deal is with the artists, and
Which is exactly the situation that caused the Pilch Point to get a new theme song.
right, because there's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of things where it's like, okay, you can use this for a while, but you can't use it again, right? There used to
Mm-hmm.
be, I don't know if they still do this for online because online people archive everything, but I think there used to be a thing with some of these image libraries like AP and Getty or whatever. Where it's like, yeah, you can print this today, but you can't print it again tomorrow.
Yep.
And they would say like, hey, a website is printing it every day, so
Yep.
we're going to keep charging you forever. But
Web
anyway,
licenses from Getty are different than print licenses. Very very different.
but but one thing to point out is um, they did not the this 2 second video thing. They just scraped Shutterstock's site. If you
Yep.
don't have a login for Shutterstock, you can see all the images, but they have a watermark, and you can see the watermark in their images. So they're
Just like
grabbing data.
Birdemic.
Right? They're grabbing data without paying for it, right? Um, and and that is so even if they disclosed it, that's still stealing.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, there's plagiarism, and that which is one level, and then there's copyright violation, which is another level, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
then there's
and
armed highway robbery, which is essentially what we saw in that Godzilla image.
yes, so now what's interesting is that for better or worse, I was looking this up today, and I was gonna like reach out to Shutterstock and like for comment about this, like, are
Uh-huh.
you gonna sue? Um, and then I saw that Shutterstock had recently signed a licensing deal with OpenAI to allow them to use the Shutterstock library in dall-e, I think it is.
Hmm.
So so they seem to be okay with somebody doing this as long as they're paying,
As long as they
which is
get paid.
fair. Like
Yeah.
I mean, at least they're getting paid. But I feel bad for the author, for the artists, because I don't know if they're getting compensated for being used in the training data, or every time their work. They're certainly not being compensated every time their work is being somehow appropriated. That's hard
Yeah.
to say, right? Whether whose work was appropriated for that
Right.
particular image, um, and they're not getting credit. That's for sure.
Right.
So you know, so like the very least that that the EU should do, that US should do, and by the way, there may not need to be new laws. There may just need to be legal precedents. Like it may just need to be the case that that there's some successful lawsuits.
Yeah.
Like Getty is suing Stable Diffusion right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so like they need, let's go. I'd like to see them win, or uh, you know, because like you're severely harming, you're stealing. Like that's what it is.
Yeah.
We can call it machine learning, but it's data collection, and it's basically sanitizing the stuff so that it doesn't look like we took it from here. It's like if I go to
Yeah.
the bank and I steal a whole bunch of cash, but then I wipe all the blue dye off of it so you can't tell
Uh-huh.
that I stole it. And I'm like, look, I have a cash generator here. It just spits money out. Look at me.
Yeah.
Like, that's what's going on with generative AI. They're taking data that they don't without permission from many different websites that have created data, some of which are nonprofit, but some of which are for profit, which paid for it, which people did work, and they're taking the names off of it. They're mixing it up a little bit so you can't 100% track it back to the source and claiming it as their own.
Mm-hmm.
So there should be a law based on this, but there may also be lawsuits. And
Yeah.
the EU AI Act should do more than just disclosure. They should have to pay for licensing.
And we'll see exactly how this goes, because we've seen this before, right? The amount of time between the draft being approved this week and a final version being circulated within the EU Parliament, um, there there's going to be a gap. Just the USB-C thing from the time there was a draft till the time it was in Parliament's hands, I think was 6 months, and that was just for should should we charge things on USB-C? So,
Yeah.
I mean, that was significantly less complex than what we're talking about here. So we'll see what happens here. There's a lot of other interesting stuff happening around this bill. Amnesty International has gotten involved in it, talking about let's see, what's the quote? The AI Act offers EU lawmakers an opportunity to put an end to the use of discriminatory and rights violating artificial intelligence systems. Now, what are they talking about? I don't know. But that's an interesting set of words. And I'm really interested to see exactly what they mean by that. Because rights violating could be 100% what we're talking about here, right? It could be copyright. But it's Amnesty International. It could also be stuff like this AI generated adult content of real people. That's a rights violation as well. So I'm really interested to see what Amnesty International wants to see happen here. Because if they're getting involved, there's going to be movement here.
Yeah, I mean, deep fakes. We when people, we talk a lot about, like, the text side of all this with, like, ChatGPT, but
Mm-hmm.
deep fakes, right?
Yeah,
Um, and in Europe, don't you have the right to your image, whereas in
yeah,
the U.S. you don't?
yeah, yeah. Public or private, I think, in the EU, as opposed to
Yeah,
here, you don't have any reasonable expectation of privacy if you're in public. Which, I mean, that's what those words mean. But I understand what their goal was.
but what's interesting to me about that, though, is, like, how does that apply to images that are just made from, well, nothing, as we've discussed, nothing in AI is actually made for
Right,
out of whole cloth.
right.
But taking that as an assumption that it's creating an image of you. If I say create an image of, you know of somebody snorting cocaine or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and that's terrible for their reputation, I mean, besides the slander of it, or can they sue me for, like, hey, you made my image? In the
Mm-hmm.
US, just making an image of somebody, uh I don't think, like, if I draw someone, I'm entitled to do that. So if I could photo make an image of someone, I'm allowed to, I think. Whereas in the EU, you have, I think, a right to your likeness.
I think so. Yeah, it's going to be. there's going to be a lot going on here. And, we've been having these conversations for years. It's far more important today than it was before. I had a conversation with Dr. Woody Flowers, the former head of the engineering department at MIT, about a Michelle Obama adult deep fake. We had that conversation in like 2019, I think. When did he die? 2019. So it might have been April of 2019 we had that conversation. And he's like, and this is what's happening now. This is just the beginning. We gotta prepare for this stuff. So we didn't exactly prepare for it in the way that he had hoped, but it does seem like maybe things are going to start catching up to protect people and information. So we'll see. Again, it was like a 6-month delay on should we charge things on USB-C. So I don't know how long we're going to have to wait on this, but my guess is we're going to hear progress on this one, which we didn't on... I keep going back to the USB-C thing because it was the last major tech thing that the EU Parliament took on. I didn't really hear updates on that one because from draft to publish, it didn't really change. But this is going to change a lot. Lots of people have an interest in this. Publishers have an interest in it to ensure that, they're being not just credited but compensated, and Amnesty International's got an interest in this, and lots of people and organizations are going to put their 2 cents in. So this is going to evolve a lot from this draft to something serious. And because the internet is global, this will affect us here as well in the same way that GDPR did. So we will be keeping a close eye on this as it evolves. Hello, YouTube. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of F5 Live Refreshing Technology. If you did, please subscribe to the channel down below, and of course hit the notification bell because we know that subscriptions don't mean much on YouTube anymore. If you've got topics that you'd like us to talk about in the future, please comment them down below. And if you'd like to not follow us on YouTube, there's lots of ways that you can follow along with our content by going to PLUGHITZlive.com/subscribe. There you'll see all of our shows and all of the ways that you can watch, listen, and follow along.